They all raised their hands one by one like jurors casting a final verdict. My sister-in-law, Lauren, stood at the head of the table, chin slightly lifted, wearing the kind of smug smile you'd expect from someone who thought she'd already won. She posed the question with feigned nonchalance, as if it were some light-hearted group decision. Should Elena be excluded from future family gatherings? No one flinched. The hands started going up, Diane's first, without hesitation, followed immediately by Frank's, then Lauren's husband, then cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, and even their spouses who barely knew me. It was orchestrated. They didn't look at me. They looked at each other, reading the room for cues, falling in line. All of them except one, Walter. Grandpa Walter sat still, eyes locked on me, his hand firmly at his side as if refusing to betray something sacred. I remained frozen in place. My son Noah had his small arms wrapped tightly around my waist, his fingers bunching the fabric of my dress like he thought he could anchor us both. His eyes wide and unsure scanned the room. "Mom," he whispered, "why are they doing this to you?" His voice cracked the cold silence like glass. I felt my throat close up, but I didn't cry. I smiled, that sharp, hollow kind of smile you wear when you know your dignity is all you have left. I stood slowly, steadying Noah with one hand. "Thank you for the meal," I said, though no one had really welcomed us. No one had even asked if we were hungry. We left our untouched plates and walked out of that pristine house that smelled of lemon polish and old resentment. No one followed, no one called after us. They just let the door shut behind us like they'd planned this ending, and maybe they had. But the next week, each of them, every hand raiser, found something waiting in their mailboxes. A letter was sent from a firm they'd never heard of, and the moment they opened it, everything changed. Inside was something that shut them up completely. Sometimes it takes just one moment, one decision made in the quiet of your own kitchen to shift the story everyone thought they were writing for you. If this story has made you pause, made you reflect, or even reminded you of a moment when you found your voice after being pushed aside, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video or subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring these stories real, raw, and unfiltered to people who might need to hear that they're not alone. Weekends didn't always feel like this, hollow and weighted. Back when my husband Ethan was still alive, they were loud in the best way. Laughter spilled out of every open window, kids darted through the grass, barefoot tripping over toys, shouting about who was it in a game they never finished. The scent of garlic bread always clung to the air, Ethan's specialty, mingling with the crackle of old country songs from Grandpa Walter's portable speaker, even as Lauren groaned dramatically, telling him for the 100th time to please, for the love of everyone under 60, turn it down. But Walter just smiled, tapping his cane to the beat, as if her words were background noise. After the accident, after Ethan was gone, Sundays turned into something else entirely. Not quiet, no, something worse. A kind of silence so loud it hurt your ears. At first the family tried. I won't pretend they didn't. For the first few weeks, casseroles lined our porch. Lauren brought over one she swore she made, but I knew the packaging too well. Store-bought with the sticker half peeled on the side. She'd hug me, always smelling of lavender and authority. Diane and Frank urged me to stay close, not to drift. Family is everything, Diane had said once, her hand on my shoulder, but her eyes already elsewhere. But sympathy has an expiration date. The messages thinned out. At first it was thinking of you with a heart emoji, then just the emoji. Then nothing. Phone calls stopped. Weekend invitations never came. I didn't fight it. I didn't ask why. I didn't throw guilt or seek pity. I just became invisible, not out of malice, but disinterest. I wasn't Elena, the woman they loved. I was Ethan's widow, the shadow left behind. Without him, I reminded them of something they didn't want to carry, grief or maybe guilt. But Noah never stopped asking. He was just 7 when Ethan died, and now at 10 he still had his father's dimpled smile and that same watchful quiet, always observing, never interrupting. One evening, as we passed the living room where the photos still sat untouched, he asked gently, "Mom, why doesn't Grandma Diane call anymore?" I paused, choosing my words. "Maybe they're just busy," I said. "Maybe they don't know how to talk about Daddy." He nodded, but his eyes dimmed, and the weight of being forgotten settled into his small chest like it belonged there. So when Lauren messaged me seemingly out of nowhere that Thursday afternoon, I stared at the text like it had teeth. "Family dinner this Sunday. Would be nice to see you and Noah. I reread it 5 times trying to find the trap. It felt rehearsed, calculated. But then I looked over at Noah, saw how his eyes lit up when I mentioned it. That was all it took. We said yes. We arrived 10 minutes early. Their house looked like it had been scrubbed for a magazine shoot, not a pillow out of place, not a single Lego on the floor. Lauren greeted us with that curated smile, the kind you practice in front of a mirror. "You look amazing," she said, kissing my cheek like we were old friends. The scent of her lavender perfume hit me like déjà vu, still sweet, still suffocating. Noah ran ahead, excited to find his cousins. I lingered slower already, feeling like I had overstayed a welcome I hadn't been offered. In the kitchen, Diane stood slicing lemons like she'd never stopped mid-sentence when she heard the door. I watched her hands move, never once looking up. Frank sat slouched in the den, eyes glued to the TV, barely offering a nod. No one asked how the drive was. No one said, "We missed you." I offered to help with dinner. Diane handed me the salad bowl without meeting my gaze, then turned her back to resume a conversation with Lauren, one that instantly picked up speed laughter, punctuating every sentence, none of which involved me. I stayed quiet, smiled, and stirred the lettuce like it mattered. When dinner was finally served, I noticed Noah already seated at the kids' table in the next room. Lauren gave him his plate first, then the other children, then returned to the main table where the adults had begun passing dishes without offering them my way. I had to lean over the centerpiece awkwardly, reaching past Diane's wine glass, just to get a scoop of potatoes. It wasn't open hostility. It was something Colder practiced exclusion. The conversations floated above my head. Promotions at work, soccer tournaments, cruise plans. They danced around me like I was furniture. No one asked about Noah. No one asked about me. I could have disappeared into the carpet and no one would have noticed, except Walter. He gave me one small glance across the room, a nod that felt like a hand on the back. But that night I realized something deeper. I hadn't been invited to reconnect. I'd been summoned to be dismissed quietly and with a smile. It felt like we were intruders at a celebration that hadn't included our names on the guest list, spectators at a performance we weren't meant to applaud. The only warmth in the entire house came from Grandpa Walter. He moved with quiet effort, now leaning into his cane with every step, but his presence remained unshakably grounded, like a lighthouse in fog. He shuffled to the seat beside me, offering the bread basket without fanfare. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly, almost like a secret. "Noah needs to feel like he still belongs." He paused, eyes steady. "And so do you, even if the rest of them haven't figured that out yet." I swallowed hard, pushing back the lump that had climbed up my throat. Walter always knew when to speak, not just what to say, but when to say it. I glanced across the room and found Noah at the kids' table, laughing with Mason, his cousin. His face was lit with joy, mouth full, eyes shining. He didn't see the way the room shifted when I walked through it. He didn't notice how the air cooled or how voices dipped to a hush as I passed. He was still a child, beautifully naive, still believing people are who they say they are, and I didn't want to take that away from him. Not yet. So I smiled. I stayed quiet. I convinced myself I could endure just this one dinner for Noah. But what happened next would slice through that calm like a blade, peeling back every layer I'd spent years building just to function. It came after dessert. Plates cluttered the long dining table, strewn with the remains of cake crumbs and half-drunk glasses of wine. The children had thundered down to the basement, their laughter echoing faintly below us. I let my shoulders relax for the first time, thinking maybe I had made it through. Then Lauren stood up. She picked up her spoon and tapped it gently against her glass. A crystalline clink followed by the sudden hush of expectation. All eyes turned to her as if on cue. I straightened, assuming she was going to announce something lighthearted, a pregnancy, a family trip, maybe a toast. I forced my lips into a hopeful curve. Then she said it. "I think we need to talk about the tension in this family." Her voice was calm, almost performative. She sighed like she was about to do a kindness, like she was carrying a burden no one else was brave enough to name. She glanced toward her husband, who gave her a subtle nod. "I know I'm not the only one who's felt it," she went on, eyes scanning the table. "This unease, this weird energy, and I think it's time we were honest about where it's coming from." I didn't understand, not at first. No one looked at me, but something tightened in my chest. A signal. A shift. "I'm not trying to stir up drama," she added quickly, performing innocence. But I think it's fair to say that ever since Elena came back into the picture, things just haven't been the same. It was the first time she said my name all evening. Not warmly, not with welcome, but like I was a stain on the linen tablecloth, a problem to be named and solved. I stared at her frozen. I'm not saying you haven't been through a lot, she added, turning to face me now, her tone bordering on condescension. We all loved Ethan. We all grieved him. But we've had to move on. And it's starting to feel like we're constantly walking on eggshells. Some of us, she repeated, letting the words hang there. I looked around the table. Diane avoided my gaze, eyes locked on her untouched wine. Frank crossed his arms, settling deeper into his chair. A couple of cousins fidgeted with their napkin silverware, suddenly fascinating. Then Lauren smiled, that smile I would remember in my bones. So she said with airy finality, I thought we could just vote. No hard feelings. Just a show of hands. Should Elena be uninvited from future family gatherings? For the sake of peace? For a heartbeat, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her, but then I saw Diane's hand rise calm and certain, then Frank's, then Mason's parents, then others' cousins who hadn't spoken 2 words to me all night, people who had once passed me mashed potatoes and now wouldn't meet my eyes. One after another, every hand lifted in eerie synchronization. Every hand, except Grandpa Walter's. My body went cold. My vision blurred slightly at the edges. I felt my pulse in my ears, a roar I couldn't quiet. My stomach dropped. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then I felt the slightest tug at my sleeve. Noah. He had padded back upstairs, probably wanting a second helping of cake. But instead he walked into this. He looked around bewildered, then turned to me. His voice, low and uncertain, shattered whatever resolve I had left. Mom, why are they doing this? That question undid me, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. And I couldn't say it out loud in front of him. I steadied my face, forced the corners of my mouth upward. My lips trembled. I reached for his hand, standing slowly. Thank you for dinner, I said to the room, to the silence. My voice was small but unshaken. We should be going. No one stopped us. Not one person reached for me. Not a word of protest. As we turned to leave, Grandpa Walter rose and rested a hand on my shoulder. You don't deserve this, he murmured. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak. I held Noah's hand all the way to the car like it was the only lifeline I had left. He didn't speak again, just leaned into me while I buckled his seatbelt, his head resting on my arm like he could feel I was falling apart inside. I drove us home in a silence so heavy it felt like it might break something inside me if I let it stay too long. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, long after the lights had gone out, long after Noah's breathing fell into the soft rhythm of dreams. He lay beside me on the bed, his little body curved against mine, one hand still clinging to the fabric of my sleeve like he was anchoring me to this world. His grip had loosened slightly, but the message was the same: don't leave. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the occasional groan of the old heater, but mostly I listened to my own thoughts. I replayed everything in slow motion, Lauren's polished voice, the quiet gasp of the room, the way those hands had lifted one after another as if they were swatting a fly. The way Noah had looked up at me, confused but trusting. Why are they doing this? That question haunted me, not because I couldn't answer it, but because I knew I could, and the truth of it was unbearable. I knew Lauren had planned it. That wasn't a spur-of-the-moment outburst. It was theater. She'd written the lines, cast the roles, and handed out cues. It had been months in the making, possibly longer, all the subtle digs, the cold shoulders, the polite exclusions, it was all part of her design. She didn't want peace. She wanted me erased. The vote wasn't for harmony. It was a public execution wrapped in civility. And I'd sat there letting it happen, letting her write me out of the story. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was done being silent. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry in their living rooms or beg for re-entry into their curated little circle. But I was no longer playing the role of the grief-stricken widow who'd forgotten how to stand up straight. That part of me died at that table. The next move was mine. Careful not to wake Noah, I slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen. I put on the kettle out of habit, but the tea sat untouched. Instead, I opened my laptop. My hands moved slowly at first, trembling slightly. I clicked on a folder buried in a subfolder I hadn't opened in years. Family Stuff it was called, which now felt bitterly ironic. Inside were screenshots, old voicemails, saved texts, fragments of moments I'd ignored or brushed off thinking it was just me being too sensitive. But seen all together, they told a different story. There was the text from Lauren from nearly a year ago. You don't need to come to Noah's piano recital, it might be uncomfortable with the whole family there. Another from Diane. If you could just drop him off at Mason's party, I think that would be easiest for the other parents. Message after message. Each one had felt like a single snowflake. But now piled together, I saw the avalanche for what it was. A campaign slow, deliberate, eroding my place in the family under the guise of what's best. I opened my notes app and started typing. I didn't filter. I listed every slight, every backhanded comment about my parenting, every time I was excluded from decisions about Noah's school holidays, family gatherings. I wrote down the vote the moment my name was turned into a problem to be voted out of existence. And then I wrote down every time Lauren had said things like, "We all feel a little uncomfortable when you're around," or "You can be so dramatic sometimes." By the time the sun began to lighten the edges of the sky, I had made up my mind. I searched for law firms that specialized in family conflict, emotional harm, and reputational damage. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted boundaries written in a language they couldn't ignore. Within a day, I had an appointment booked with a lawyer named Danica Rodas. She was cool, unshakable, the kind of person whose silence could level a room. When I explained what happened, she didn't blink. She simply asked, "Do you have documentation?" I nodded. I had texts, I had timestamps, I had voice memos. And then almost by accident, I remembered Noah's smartwatch. We'd gotten it for him 2 birthdays ago. I'd forgotten it could store voice logs. When I checked the audio files, my breath caught. It had captured almost everything from that night Lauren's announcement, the scattered silence, the laughter before the vote. Even the moment she leaned in and said under her breath, "She's too weak to fight back anyway." Danica listened to the recording with the same calm she had when I first walked in. When it finished, she leaned back and said, "We'll begin with a cease and desist. But we'll include the evidence. We're not just addressing hurt feelings here, we're documenting a pattern. Strategic exclusion, public humiliation, and emotional harm inflicted on a minor." I exhaled slowly, fully. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me. We discussed the next steps, not a lawsuit. Not yet. But a formal notice, a warning. One that would clearly outline the legal consequences of any future attempts to manipulate or emotionally harm my son or isolate me as his parent. 2 days later, her office sent out the letters, one for each adult who had raised a hand, personalized, signed, delivered. They didn't know it yet, but everything had changed. Each family member received their own copy, sealed quiet and devastating. It didn't come with warning shots or shouting matches. There were no dramatic confrontations, just the thump of envelopes hitting their mailboxes on a crisp Thursday morning. Each letter bore the unmistakable stamp of Rhodes and Keene family law. No duplicates, no group messages. Every single adult who had raised their hand received their own individually addressed reckoning, and it landed like thunder in a room where they'd grown used to silence. I told no one, not a soul. I didn't post vague quotes online. I didn't send preemptive texts. That morning, I woke up like any other scrambled eggs, packed Noah's lunch, kissed the top of his head as I dropped him off at school. I even stopped for coffee on the way home, but inside I carried something different, a steady quiet that wasn't fear or anger, it was certainty, a knowing. A line had been drawn, and for once I wasn't the one shrinking behind it. The reactions came fast. By midday, my phone lit up. First a missed call from Diane, then 2 messages from Frank. "We need to talk. This is going too far." I didn't answer. At 1:23 p.m., Lauren finally weighed in. "Seriously, a lawyer? What the hell is wrong with you? And 10 minutes later, you're really going to destroy this family over one awkward dinner?" I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, I had 1,000, but because it wasn't about the dinner, and she knew it. It never was. It was about the system they'd quietly built, and the moment I stopped participating in it. Inside the letter, Danica had been meticulous. Her language wasn't emotional, it was razor-sharp, unshakable, and legally binding. She outlined point by point a timeline of exclusion and manipulation. She included transcripts of key texts, timestamps, and voice log excerpts from Noah's smartwatch. The part that hit hardest, and I know it did because no one dared to contest it, was the line Lauren had whispered when she thought no one was listening. "She's too weak to fight back anyway." It was printed in bold. And this time, the one who whispered behind closed doors was the one exposed. The letter didn't just accuse, it warned. If there were further attempts to isolate me to create a hostile emotional atmosphere for Noah, formal complaints would follow, including one to Child Protective Services. they would be held accountable in writing in court if needed. But it was the final paragraph that made the deepest cut. It read, "This firm represents a mother who for years chose silence for the sake of peace. That silence is no longer a gift she's willing to give." In less than 24 hours, the entire House of Cards fell silent. No one asked if the audio was real. No one challenged the timeline, because they all knew, and silence was the only response they could afford. The next day, Friday, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just a plain folded card. It was from Diane. Her handwriting trembled slightly. "I'm sorry for what happened. We didn't think you'd actually do this. Maybe we were wrong about you." I read it once, closed it slowly, and slipped it into the drawer where I keep my wedding ring, not out of sentiment, but remembrance. Later that afternoon, Grandpa Walter called. "Your lawyer?" he said with a chuckle, gave them all heart palpitations. "Lauren hasn't said a word all day." "She deserves worse," I said without hesitation. "She does," he replied, "but I'm proud of you anyway." That weekend, Noah asked if we'd be going back to their house. He was playing with his markers at the kitchen table, drawing Saturn with too many rings. I looked at him, this gentle, brave child who had seen more emotional cruelty in one night than most adults ever would. "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Not for a while." He paused, then nodded. "That's okay. Can we go to the beach instead?" "Yes," I smiled. "The beach sounds perfect." It's been 3 months since the letters went out. Not a single family dinner invite. No apologies spoken out loud. Not even another group message. And the silence. It hasn't faded. It's deepened. But for the first time in years, that silence feels like space. Room to breathe. Room to live. I don't wake up scanning my phone, bracing for the cold tone of another just being honest message. I don't walk into rooms preparing to earn back space I was always entitled to. I no longer shrink to make others comfortable. Most importantly, Noah is okay. He's more than okay. He stopped asking about the cousins who never wrote. He doesn't hover near the mailbox, hoping for birthday cards that were never coming. Instead, we've built something new, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Every Sunday now, we get donuts from the corner shop and walk the lake trail near our apartment. Noah brings his sketchbook. I bring my coffee. We sit on a weathered bench, the same one Ethan used to take him to as a toddler, and we talk about planet's Pokemon and the kinds of animals we'd be if we weren't human. There's no tension, no tiptoeing, just laughter light and room to be ourselves. I also started therapy. That was new for me. I used to think therapy was for people unraveling. Turns out it's for people holding so much together they forget to let go. My therapist gave me words for what I hadn't dared name: exclusion, emotional abuse, psychological erosion, dressed up in smiles and potluck dinners. She told me I wasn't fragile. I was surviving something no one had ever validated. It wasn't just a betrayal that night, it was the final rehearsed act in a performance they'd been staging for years. A slow erosion of dignity, a quiet campaign of almosts and not quites. And when I finally saw it for what it was, when the fog of obligation lifted something inside me, knit back together, something I hadn't even realized had been broken all along. And yet, strangely, I didn't feel rage. I didn't lie awake at night imagining ways to make them feel small or ashamed. That's the part no one ever tells you. When healing finally comes, it replaces the need for revenge. Because I never wanted to burn their world down. I just wanted to stop shrinking inside mine. I wanted Noah to have a mother who could teach him what real strength looks like. Not the kind that yells across dinner tables or sends angry texts in the middle of the night. Real strength is quieter. It's the kind you carry in your spine when you choose to walk away from people who've already made up their minds about you and still hold your head high after the door closes behind you. Some might say I overreacted, that it was just a vote, just one dinner. But if you've ever sat in a room full of people pretending you're not really there, smiling with their mouths while their eyes erase you, you know how deafening that silence can be. I didn't hire an attorney to cause drama. I didn't want to be the center of some family scandal. I did it because there comes a point where your voice has to weigh more than your silence. And for years, I gave them my silence like it was some kind of peace offering. I showed up. I stayed polite. I accepted being left out of decisions, out of photos, out of the room, just to keep things from becoming uncomfortable. I gave them every opportunity to treat me with basic respect, to see me not as a disruption, but as Noah's mother, Ethan's wife, a woman still standing. But instead they wrapped their cruelty in manners. Politeness weaponized, civility used as a shield for exclusion. and they assumed I'd stay quiet because I always had. They were wrong, and I've learned a lot since then. About family, about loyalty, about what truly matters. Family isn't sacred just because it shares your last name. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to chip away at your self-worth. DNA doesn't excuse disrespect. And loyalty? It's not measured by how much pain you're willing to endure for the sake of keeping the peace. Real family, the kind that deserves a seat at your table, is built, chosen, nurtured. Every Saturday, Grandpa Walter still comes by. He brings sugar cookies from that little bakery on Maple Street, and he and Noah play chess like two kids with nowhere else to be. They're both terrible at it. The pieces never end up where they should, but the laughter makes more sense than any apology ever could. He never brings up the others, and I never ask. We've made a quiet pact, leave the past where it belongs. Last week, as Noah colored in the kitchen, he looked up at me and asked, "Do you think they miss us?" I paused. Maybe I told him, but missing someone doesn't mean you treated them right. He nodded slowly, then went back to shading Saturn's rings with his favorite blue pencil. He's growing up with a kind of emotional wisdom most adults never get close to. For a long time, I thought this was a story about being cast out, about grief compounding on loss. But now I understand it's about liberation. It's about walking away, not in shame, but in clarity. I didn't lose a family. I freed myself from one that never really made space for me to belong. And now we're building something entirely new, not bigger, not noisier, but real, gentle, ours. If you've made it this far, if this story touched a bruise you've kept hidden, if you've ever sat at a table pretending not to feel invisible, I hope this brought you something, a breath, a whisper of strength, a reminder that walking away is not weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest kind of power there is. Thank you for being here, truly. We don't need a room full of people to belong, just one space where we're heard and maybe, just maybe, healed.